Cinemassacres Monster Madness holds a very special place in my heart. When I was young, I was petrified of horror films, but had a very strong fascination for them, and I enjoyed a lot of horror subgenres, particularly monster movies, science fiction B-movies, and generally black and white kind of 50s era horror films. And that was really my only avenue for appreciating the genre. I was way too afraid to try literally anything else, even other black and white horror films. There was just something about the 50s that felt a little bit more wholesome, I guess. And then, I don't know how old I would have been, however old you are in like the 6th grade, I guess, I discovered Cinemassacre. First thing that I was exposed to was James Rolfe's Top 10 Giant Movie Monsters and The Angry Video Game Nerd. And I was hooked, and then thankfully, I decided to give Monster Madness a try. So I was so afraid of horror films that I was even hesitant to watch it. But fortunately, they do a really great job of packaging that and making it inviting and making it seem fun. And it got me completely, like my fascination just skyrocketed from that point. My fascination with the horror genre continued to grow, and the level of excitement that I had for a genre that I was terrified to watch, like the balance started to really outweigh each other. My interest started to grow beyond how afraid I was of the genre. And there was a very important line that James had, and I forget which video it was in, might have been in one of the Monster Madness promos, where he talks about how he started with the classics and then worked his way up to more contemporary horror films. And I thought, that's what I'm gonna do, because I felt like if I start early, maybe I'll build up a tolerance to the horror genre and I'll be able to stomach the scarier stuff. I had a very traumatic experience when I was like 5 years old. I went over to my cousin's house and my older cousin was watching Freddy vs. Jason, and I had walked in during the scene where Jason stabs the guy on the bed and then folds it. And I was petrified of that. I went into the other room, and when I eventually came back out, it was the scene where Freddy tries to kill the guy in the dream for the first time and like comes out across the street and slashes at him. And that was enough to give me insomnia. So that's what I wanted to build up to. I wanted to get to a point where I felt confident enough to confront my fear and give Freddy vs. Jason another try, which is funny in hindsight because that movie's not very scary. I started watching Monster Madness, and it gave me the confidence to start watching horror movies, starting with the classics. I kind of watched along with the first Monster Madness, starting with the history of horror films. I began watching them almost the same way. Back in the day, it was much easier to find full movies on YouTube. They'd often be in like 7 parts. I remember watching Nosferatu, the Bela Lugosi Dracula, The Wolfman, the first 2 or 3 Boris Karloff Frankensteins, all on YouTube in like 8 parts. And I loved them. I cannot explain it, but the atmosphere, the look, the aesthetic, the soundtrack, the performances, it was all these things that I think really captured my interest. There's just something about fear that I just find so engaging. I love roller coasters. I love all that stuff. I'm not a thrill seeker or like an adrenaline junkie or anything. Maybe I am, and to some degree, but instead of skydiving and bungee jumping, which I don't think I would ever do, I go down the horror genre. The thing I love about Monster Madness, not only that it's informative, but it's the presentation. Whenever James and sometimes Mike would get on camera or just talk about the things they loved and were passionate about, the passion was palpable. Their love for the genre and for the movies they were talking about was just so instantly recognizable that you couldn't help but just be engaged by what they were saying. And I always loved the intros and how they are always fitting the theme, history of horror film, just a collage of a bunch of horror movies just right at the beginning. James's theatrics was always just a part of it. And then, you had the 80s-a-thon, which was very, 80s, not funk, but, very, very 80s.
Yeah. Word to your mummy. You know what time it is. So don't go anywhere. It's Cinemassacres Monster Madness 80s-a-thon.
Which was appropriate, and then the sequel-a-thon would just be, each intro would be relevant to the series that James would be talking about. And I don't know, like it introduced me to so many horror films. This isn't even really a review or a critique or anything of Monster Madness. This is just me singing the praise and sharing my love for that series. I've always said that when you're introduced to Cinemassacre, you come for the nerd, or you come for Bored James, or you come for, it's bullshit, and then you stay for Monster Madness. The production value is great, but simple. They didn't need to be overly theatrical with it. It's not like they ever had really elaborate sets and, went over the top to kind of create a show. It was really just about appreciating these movies and giving obscure movies and maybe even some shit films a chance to shine. And that's something that I have always appreciated, and just, I just love it. I realize I'm kind of sucking them off a little bit here, just, doing nothing but gush about this series, but it's a very important series to me. I get excited every time October comes around, and unfortunately, they don't do Monster Madness to the same degree that they used to, but I understand it's a huge workload, and I don't blame them for not being able to continue how they used to do it, but it's an hugely important part of my childhood. It's a hugely important part of how I developed as an aspiring filmmaker. They introduced me to some movies that, have left such a mark on me that I just can't stop thinking about them. I dream about making movies like the films that Monster Madness introduced to me. I know tons of people who are also familiar with Cinemassacre that also do a 31 horror movie marathon. I do one every year. Even if I can't watch one every day, I try to at least squeeze in 31 movies. And yeah, that's really all I have to say. Just that I absolutely love this series, and I recommend it to anybody who's just interested in horror films. Even if you don't watch them, even if you're spooked by them, like I said, the passion is palpable. You're just hooked on every word he says, because you can just hear just the respect that he has for these movies and filmmakers. So yeah, Cinemassacre Monster Madness, a hugely influential part of my childhood. I strongly recommend it. If you don't know where to start, I always say just start at the beginning. History of horror films. They're all equally as amazing. Thanks for watching. But before we go, it's time to raise that spookometer. There we go, just filling that in, a little bit of blood down there. Hell yeah. Hell yeah.